I'd like to introduce two guests today, Stuart Smedley, again my husband, and Susie Reese. This is a topic that is not a warm fuzzy, as I call it, but one that's very necessary and one that's very problematic in the medical field, as well as just on a personal level. I'll give you Stuart's credentials first, and I must admit I was quite impressed when we were writing them down. Oh my. Okay, he's your Garland County coroner, has been for the last 8 years. 6 years prior to that, he served as deputy coroner. He has been 9 years certified as ABMDI, which is a national certification medical legal death scene investigator. He has been 2 years certified at a state level of that same medical legal death scene investigation. The reason just 2 years there is Arkansas is just now coming up to that certification, because he's also on an education committee with the Arkansas Coroners Association that's trying to raise the level, the standard of care, the standard of certification for coroners throughout the state of Arkansas, because currently you have to be a registered voter and live in that county. That's your only qualifications for being a coroner, which was eye-opening to me. He's also Arkansas Coroners Association Executive Board member for 8 years, as well as their treasurer. He's a member of the International Association of Coroners and Medical Examiners. He has been a National Registered Paramedic for 35 years. He's an instructor for Law Enforcement Academy, instructor for the Fire Training Academy. He also served 8 years in the Sheriff's Office Reserve as lieutenant. So, lots of credentials. Miss Susie Reese, chair of the Garland County Suicide Prevention Coalition, and this has been 2 years into that task force. Project manager with Ouachita Children's Center Prevention, specialist with Community Service Incorporated, and she's also a published author of a children's book. So I'll welcome up Stuart first, and then we'll do Miss Susie.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Yes, I'm Stuart Smedley, and I am her other half. Necessarily better or worse, just the other half. And I will go ahead and get the comedy out of the way, just right up front. Two things that are certain: death and taxes. I'm one of those. And I get people come up to me all the time, and they give me a little one-liner like I've never heard any of those ever before. But yes, I'm the guy that people are just dying to meet. Get that one a lot. So that is me. Real quick, just wanted to touch on something that Barna said. In the state of Arkansas, to be the coroner, if you can get elected to the position, you can be it. Okay, which is a sad state of affairs in my book. Okay, we always say if you can spell it, you can be it, and there are several of them in the state that can't spell it. So we the Arkansas Coroners Association we are trying desperately to raise those standards. It's a constitutional office, so anything that we change, any requirements that we try to come up with, requires a change in the Constitution. So it's a long, slow process getting that to happen. But I am excited that we do now have an Arkansas Coroners certification course. We partnered with the Law Enforcement Academy, and this is the first year that we've rolled that out, and we've had a great response to it so far. The majority of the coroners in the state of Arkansas, this is a part-time job. Most of them, the state is broken up into classifications of counties, 7 being the most populated. There are only 3 Class 7 counties: Pulaski County, Washington County, and Benton County. Garland County falls into a Class 6 category. Everything Class 5 and below, I think there's only one Class 5 county coroner that's considered a full-time job. The rest of them, they own the local funeral home. Some of them, own the local hardware store. It's just a part-time thing that they do on the side. This is my full-time job, more than full-time. It's more than, I don't know how I managed to get 48 hours into one day, but I do. This is a passion that I have. I don't look at it as a job. People look at it and you're the coroner, and they kind of give me that look, and I'm going, yes, I'm the coroner. But I love what I do. Okay? Yes, we have an investigation to do. There's no reason why we can't do that investigation and be kind and compassionate to the family members that it affects. And I'm very, very proud of my staff that I think we do a really good job of that. You're very fortunate in that you do have a coroner in Garland County that does have some education. You also have the privilege of having a coroner in Saline County, for those of you who live in the Saline County side of the village. Kevin Cleghorn is the coroner there. You can read my bio as kind of read out, and just about everything on that also applies to Kevin. We do things a lot the same way, and constantly communicating back and forth. My topic, suicide, not something that people want to talk about. I've spent my initial career in defense. I'm still a paramedic. I keep my certification current. I'm still a nationally registered paramedic. But when I went to work for the coroner's office is when this became something that really hit me in the face. When you're making the calls on, with the ambulance service, one call is another call. It's another sick person. It's another, trauma or whatever that we go to, and you don't really stop and think about what that problem was. You're just trying to fix them. You're just trying to get them to the hospital in better shape than what you found them. But when I started at the coroner's office, it hit me full face just how bad this problem is in Garland County. And so I started kind of keeping records on it. And I went back, and I'm going by some numbers that I put together here recently, but since 2004, we've had up to including 2015, we've had 330 suicides in Garland County. Now, that may not sound like a real big number over a 12-year span, but it's the way this has escalated over time. In 2004, we had 20. When it really got my attention was the next year when it jumped to 33. Last year, we had 40. Okay? There were more suicides in Garland County last year than there were fatality car wrecks. Now, there's something wrong with that picture. And the problem is, and I have people that that will ask me, and I know everybody's going to look at me and say, okay, what's broken? What's the problem? And I wish I could answer that question. It's and as Susie is going to, I'm going to bring her up here in a minute. It is a broken system. When I met Susie, the Garland County Suicide Prevention Coalition were getting their running legs under them and getting their organization ready to go. And they came to the office to basically get these numbers from me, to get these statistics. And Susie made the mistake of saying, well, I'd like to get your opinion on some things. And my chief editor was there with me at the time, and he kind of chuckled, and she looked at him funny, and he said, you don't need to ask him for his opinion. He's got an opinion on everything, and he's not afraid to get it. And I think I kind of floored Susie because I asked her point blank, I said, do you know how the system works? If I run out here in the middle of the crowd and start screaming to the top of my lungs that I want to kill myself, what happens? What's the sequence of events after that? The sequence of events are somebody's going to call 911, police department's going to show up, they're going to call for an ambulance. Now, there's nothing medically wrong with me. Okay, I'm living, breathing, talking, screaming to the top of my lungs, I want to kill myself. But we're going to tie up a perfectly good ambulance, transport that person to a busy emergency room, and ask a busy emergency room physician that's not a mental health professional to evaluate me, basically ask me about 5 questions, and if I know how to answer those questions, then I'm right back out the door. Susie's comment was, well, now when does the mental health professional get involved? I said, did you hear me say mental health professional in there? Was it part of the sequence of events? The coalition, one of the things that many things that they're working on is to change that. Again, it's not something that's easily changed. You can't just say, well, okay, now the ambulance service needs to transport to a mental health facility. The ambulance service is regulated by laws and regulations, and they have to transport to an emergency room. Okay, that's the way the laws are written. So the problem is, from my standpoint, is that it's a broken system. How do you fix that broken system? That's a big question. I'm not sure. I'm not sure exactly where to start. I do know that organizations like the Suicide Prevention Coalition is a great, great start. They have brought an awareness to this county that we've never had before. And I don't want to steal all of her thunder with some of the things that they've done here in the last year. But it does bring us to a point where you understand. How many in here knew before you looked at my ugly mug that we had 40 suicides last year in Garland County? This is something that when it touches you forever, okay? We all have the cliches. I am a death investigator by trade. That's what I do. I deal with death every day. And so, yes, we have our gallows humor, just like the ambulance service has, just like law enforcement has. And we have our cliches that we throw in there of, what is suicide? It's the ultimate selfish act. It is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. We have all of those things. All of those things are true. We, unfortunately, get somewhat calloused and gloss over it because of cliches like that and don't understand how big the problem is. I'm dispatched by the sheriff's office, and so I have a radio in my vehicle, and so I hear nonstop the calls for the sheriff's office, the police department, the village police department, going to suicide threat calls. That is almost nonstop in our county. Almost nonstop. Somewhere we've got to break this cycle. We've got to break the cycle. I was quite surprised when the suicide involving a child, those are the ones that you take home with you. Those are the ones that I quite honestly, Verna can attest to. There are days that I walk in crying. I'm not ashamed to say that. I walk in the door crying because of what it is that I've just had to deal with. And when you have somebody 13, 14, 15 years old that thinks the only way out is to end their life, if it doesn't bother you, there's something wrong with you. Okay? And yes, the old saying, you don't have to be crazy to work here, but it helps. With us, it's a prerequisite. You gotta have a little blue card that says I'm crazy to work here. But even though I'm crazy to be the coroner, I still come in, days that literally heartbroken over the things that we've seen. And at 15 years old, you haven't lived long enough to have problems that big, okay? But when you stop and think about it, when you're, Ed at 99 has not had problems big enough to end your life, okay? That just doesn't exist. So somewhere along the way, we've got to break that cycle. I was surprised, like I say, the young ones are the ones that we remember the most, but actually the target group in Garland County is between 40 and 50 years old. If you're between 40 and 50 and you're a white male, That's the top of the list in Garland County. That's top of the list in Garland County. We only, in that 12-year period, we only had 11 suicides that were 20 years old or less. I remember every one of those, okay? And I, right, wrong, or indifferent, do I necessarily remember the 47 that were over 70? Not necessarily. And bad on my part. But the young ones are the ones that get our attention. How many veterans do we have in here? I get a bunch of hands. Come on. Yeah. And I'm sure y'all are aware, you know, I think the number is 22 a day, I believe it is, on average. 2 veterans a day take their life. You know, and I wish each time I dig into this, you know, a little bit more, and I start looking at other statistics, people think that because you know, I've heard Hot Springs Village referred to as the geriatric community, and I've had quorum court members tell me, well, I guess, you know, 90% of your calls are up in Hot Springs Village. No, actually, only about 10% of our calls are in Hot Springs Village. 50% of them are in Garland County, out in the county, and only about 40% of them are inside the city limits of Hot Springs. I don't have statistics on suicides specific to Hot Springs Village, and I don't know, Ricky, y'all may have that, I'm not sure, but it's something that I can get a hold of, but it's not something that I had, you know, singled out to see. But we have to come up with, we have to have people who are willing to take the time, put in the effort, and spend the man hours, and quite honestly, the money, to find solutions for this, to bridge these gaps in the system that are so blatant when you get into it, and you know, when you're in the middle of it and you can see, okay, we've got a gap in this area, we've got a gap in this area. You know, where does mental health come in for the person that's, you know, coming in by ambulance? The repeat things that happen, you know, I hear certain addresses in Garland County that are gone to once a week because of suicide threats. Those people are the ones that scare me because we all have a tendency to, they cried wolf, so now we ignore it. And those are the ones that eventually become customers of mine. Okay? I don't want to take up all the time. Susie, Reese. Like I say, Susie made the mistake of coming to my office and asking me for my opinion. And but I want her to tell you more about the Garland County Suicide Prevention Coalition.
I'm much shorter than you. Thank you all for having me out. It's never, like you said, it's never something that's fun to discuss. And I actually didn't have anything prepared. So I'm going to wing it. I found out about this about, 8 o'clock last night, so if you will forgive me. But I actually don't have any degrees in suicide. I guess the only degree that you could say that I have is a life degree, because whenever I was 10, I was living in Washington, D.C. with my father. He was in the military. He was in the 3rd U.S. Infantry, and he started going through retirement. He was a first sergeant, and as some of you know, retirement is not necessarily an easy thing to go through. During that time, he also started a long process of going through a divorce. So he actually sat me down one night. He was telling me about how our life was going to change, and I actually told him that my stepmother had been abusing me the entire time that they had been together, and 2 days later, my dad took her life and then his own. So that was a bit of a whirlwind for me, and it really set me on a very dark and very lonely path for a long time. My grandparents actually adopted me after that, and I remember people saying things, very inappropriate things to me as a child. Like, your father went to hell, he wanted to get away from you, lots of things that don't really set well with a child that's growing up. And for the most part, no one said anything. They just kind of ignored it like it never really happened. So it was really hard because I felt like I shouldn't exist because my dad didn't exist. So it was kind of a difficult way to grow up. So for a long time, I kept asking why. Why did this happen? And then I started trying to find out. And I realize now there's no way I'll ever know exactly why this happened, but I do know a lot. I have read a lot of books. I have done a lot of studies. I have done a lot of research. And when I met Stuart, I actually told him, I was like, listen, if you ever come to my house, it was murder, because I have like an entire library on suicide. So I don't want you to think that that's what that was. I was just very curious. So I was like, don't look at the, the evidence may be lying. So as he said though, we've had 330 suicides. Let me put that in perspective for you. We know that for every death, there are at least 27 attempts, okay? 27 attempts for every death. So that's 330 multiplied by 27. And I said at least because when we're looking at our youth, that number can go up into the hundreds. I actually got in touch with LifeNet, which is our EMS service, and they told me that they get an estimated 4 mental health calls a day. So that means that 4 people are in crisis every day in Garland County. That's a lot to deal with, especially when we know that there are gaps in our service. We know that people are falling through the cracks. We know that we aren't equipped to handle this. And a lot of it has to do with knowledge. And unfortunately, because this topic has been one that was silenced and hushed, there is very limited knowledge. So this is something that's very important, because if we can educate ourselves, we can educate the rest of the community, and we can fix those gaps. So that's one of the things that our coalition has worked on, is getting the right people to understand what it is that we're looking at. And unfortunately, this is a very broad and very difficult topic. It covers everyone. Everyone in here is at risk because we're all alive. You have different levels of risk. I have risk since my dad died from suicide. My risk is elevated. So people don't understand that we all have mental health and we all have risk. When we're looking at our youth, we know that if there's a suicide within a school system, others will copycat that. That's called suicide contagion. It is true. And it has to do with the information that we give out and our education on the subject. If we aren't educated, we can't address it appropriately. So one of the things that we've done is we've gone to the school systems and we've asked that they create a school suicide prevention policy. And unfortunately, it's not something we wish that we had to have. It's just something that we have to have. I know my daughter, I'm older than I look. My daughter came home one day, this was a couple years ago, and she's like, we did a drill. And I was like, oh really, what was that? And she's like, we had to go hide in the closet. And I almost started tearing up. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is terrifying. I can't have, no, you're gonna stay in the closet forever now. But it was called a stranger in the building drill. And I was thinking about it, and I was like, what would the school do if there was an attempt, a suicide attempt on campus, and other kids saw it? What would they do? How do you control that situation? If you don't have education and aren't prepared to do it, you can't handle it the appropriate way. What if there's 40 kids around? Recently in Arizona, there was a field and track star who brought a gun to campus and shot himself. How many kids were affected because of that? And these are our children. So we know that there are demographics. We know that each group has specific risk factors. This specific group has different risk factors than our youth do. But it's just as important that you guys understand what your risk factors are, so that when your friend that you go out with every Monday and have dinner with, and he stops calling you and stops showing up and stops taking care of himself for weeks on end, you understand that there may be an issue there that's more than him being sad, or more than him not taking care of himself. There are lots and lots of things that we can be aware of. So there's a lot of warning signs, and unfortunately I don't have my PowerPoint to go over this, but that's one of our main focuses is education. As Stuart said, money is very good. Unfortunately, our group has very little. So we actually try and do everything we can for free. So that means that we have to use grant money, and unfortunately, no one just wants to give you money. So, you know, we actually did a training about 2 weeks ago, and it's a 2-day training on how do you talk to someone that's suicidal. Does anyone in here know what you would say to someone you thought might be suicidal? Yes, sir. You do? How many people are in here? What, about 50 or so? One person. That's not good. Because I can guarantee you that every single person in here knows someone that has thought about suicide at one time. They may not be in this room right now, but you know someone in your life that has considered suicide or has been directly affected by suicide. Every time I go into a room, I meet someone else who has a story. That's not a good thing. And a lot of times, those people have no one to talk to. So that's why I'm really glad that you guys brought me out today, because, you know, this isn't a fun conversation, but it's a needed conversation. It's very important because we know that people are lost, people are broken, and people are alone. And I can guarantee you that the number one protective factor, the number one thing that can help people is being available and having connections. And this right here is an amazing protective factor for all of you because you all have connections with one another. But there are so many in our community that don't. There are so many that are completely alone and don't feel like they have anyone. So suicide prevention is very broad because there are hundreds of ways for us to address this problem. But our most vital way is through our community and through those connections. There's actually, there's a photo of a gentleman going around on Facebook, and he's standing beside a fence, and it says, "This gentleman has saved over 500 lives by asking them if they wanted to have a cup of tea." And I was like, okay, that's gotta be a lie. So I looked into it, and this gentleman's name was Don Ritchie, and he lives in Australia, or he did. He actually passed. He was in his 70s when they published that article, and that was 15, 20 years ago. But he lived across from a cliff, and they called it the Gap, and it was the spot where everyone went to jump from. And he had been a life insurance salesman for his entire life, and he said that it was wonderful for him because when he would see someone standing there, he simply asked, "Would you like to have a cup of tea?" And he said, "I never asked them what was wrong, I never judged them, I never got into their business," but he couldn't even count the amount of people that willingly came back to his house and had a cup of tea. And he said, there is no better way to sell life insurance than this. So that right there shows you that one man impacted hundreds of people by simply caring. So that's what I ask all of you to do today. If you're interested in learning more, please consider me a resource. I have so much information. Like I said, we want to share this information. We're not asking for anyone to pay for anything or anything of that nature, but it does help to be able to share it. Obviously, to have trainers come in, costs and things of that nature. But I would like to thank you all for having me up here, and I hope to see some more of you at some of our trainings and events. And if you have any questions, I'll take those now. Yes, sir.
Yes, ma'am. Is there any different treatment for end-of-life suicides or assisted suicides of people that really are suffering from medical concerns? Do you get involved in that at all?
I have a lot of information on that, and it's very difficult because there are those who consider it's called rational suicide, and like I said, suicide is a very broad topic. So when we're looking at physician-assisted suicide, the reason we're concerned is because it is a burden where a lot of times you'll have someone who has family members that can't handle that burden anymore, and so they may be trying to get rid of whatever economic, those issues instead of actually looking at the care needed. There was a documentary made where a lady she had her husband, and I think he had Parkinson's, I can't remember, But he didn't want to live because she didn't want him to live. So there are issues with that because of that. And we know that with assisted suicide, there's not a lot of care put into making sure that these people are mentally healthy at the time. But there are cases, because we know that 90% of suicides are directly linked to depression or bipolar disorder, some sort of mental health issue. There are cases where it's a rational suicide, where time has been spent looking into whether it's a logical choice or not. And that's a very tricky area. When it comes to that, though, and when you're dealing with that sort of situation, for the most part, people that are dealing with depression are not rational. You cannot have a logical conversation with someone that is dealing with depression. They actually did a study where they gave them, people that were depressed, math problems, because math fixes everything. So they gave them math problems, and these people were not able to do the problems because they could not see all of the options. They only saw what was going on in their heads. So that says a lot right there. If you would like, I can get you some information on that. And a lot of people kind of steer clear of that specific question because it's really a personal opinion, and we all have those, and you all know what they're good for. So.